How you doing? I'm Callan and this is Slapped Ham. Boy, we've got an action-packed episode full of the scariest video clips going around. So hit that subscribe button and get ready for more spooky content. Just like this. This black and white photo shows Barbara Kent and her friends cooling off in a river near Ruidoso, New Mexico in the summer of 1945. At first glance, it looks like a carefree moment from a childhood summer camp, but history has revealed the picture hides a tragic truth. On July 16, 1945, the world's first atomic bomb was detonated at the Trinity site only 40 to 50 miles away. The blast lit up the pre-dawn sky and shook the girls awake in their bunks. Hours later, white flakes began falling across the mountains. Believing it was snow in July, the campers ran outside in their swimsuits laughing as they caught the flakes on their tongues and smeared them across their faces. Barbara later recalled thinking the flakes were strange. They were hot instead of cold. Unbeknownst to them, they were playing in radioactive fallout. Officials released a false statement blaming an ammunition explosion and assured locals there was no danger. No one was warned or evacuated. The exposure proved devastating. Of the 12 girls at the camp, Barbara Kent was the only one to survive into middle age. Most of her friends died young, many before the age of 40. Kent herself endured 4 different cancers over her lifetime, while her teacher and even her mother, who stayed nearby during the camp, also died from cancer. For decades, survivors like Kent were denied acknowledgement. The Radiation Exposure Compensation Act excluded New Mexico entirely, leaving Trinity downwinders to fight for recognition as cancer spread through families across the region. Only in 2024, nearly 80 years later, did Congress finally extend compensation to New Mexico victims. Advocacy groups like the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium had spent decades documenting the suffering and demanding justice. The photo of Barbara Kent and her friends, once a snapshot of joy, now stands as a haunting reminder of innocence lost. Children unknowingly playing in a radioactive snowstorm that would shape the rest of their lives. These photos tell a chilling story. Dennis Rader, smiling with his daughter in the garden, dancing at a wedding, helping put the star atop a Christmas tree. On the surface, these are snapshots of a devoted family man and community member, but Rader is better known by the name he gave himself, BTK. For decades, Rader lived a convincing double life in Wichita, Kansas. He was a husband, a father, a church president, even a Cub Scout leader. He worked as a security installer for ADT, later as a city compliance officer, jobs that gave him access to homes and allowed him to exercise authority. To neighbors, he was strict, but ordinary, sometimes a little overbearing, but nothing more. Behind closed doors, the reality was monstrous. Rader meticulously stalked his victims, binding and killing them with cold precision. He collected trophies from his crimes and lived out fantasies in private, sometimes wearing grotesque masks and costumes like the one seen in this image, to reenact his killings. The contrast is staggering. The dutiful father helping decorate a Christmas tree was also the sadistic killer who terrorized Wichita for 3 decades. His respectable roles in church and community gave him cover, while his narcissism compelled him to taunt police with letters and poems, keeping the city in fear. In the end, Rader's own arrogance betrayed him. He sent a floppy disk to police in 2005, believing he couldn't be traced. Metadata on the disk led investigators straight to his church computer, and finally to him. His capture revealed the terrifying truth, that one of Wichita's most trusted citizens had been its most feared predator all along. So how does a man live 2 lives so convincingly? Family photos in the daylight, and a mask of horror in the dark. That disturbing question still haunts criminologists today. This grainy surveillance pic says it all. In 1995, MacArthur Wheeler walked into two Pittsburgh banks, smiling directly into the cameras as he carried out his crimes. No mask, no disguise, just pure confidence in a plan that would make him infamous. Instead of concealing his face with a ski mask or stocking, Wheeler had rubbed lemon juice onto his skin. His partner, Clifton Earl Johnson, had convinced him it would make them invisible to surveillance cameras, just like invisible ink. Wheeler even tested the theory beforehand. He smeared lemon juice on his face, snapped a Polaroid, and when his face didn't appear in the photo, he was convinced it worked. Detectives later speculated he either botched the shot, used bad film, or simply pointed the camera the wrong way, while the lemon juice stung his eyes. On January 6, 1995, Wheeler and Johnson robbed two banks, walking off with about $5,200. But the illusion didn't last. Johnson was arrested within a week, and when Wheeler was shown the surveillance footage of himself looking straight into the lens, he was stunned. His only response was, "But I wore the lemon juice." Wheeler's disbelief caught the attention of psychologist David Dunning. If a man could be this wrong and yet this confident, perhaps incompetence itself blinds people to their own lack of skill. Together with Justin Kruger, he tested the theory and, in 1999, published their groundbreaking paper, Unskilled and Unaware of It. The result was the Dunning-Kruger effect, the cognitive bias where people with low ability in a specific area not only make poor decisions, but also lack the awareness to realize it. In essence, their incompetence robs them of the ability to recognize their incompetence. So what began as a botched heist with lemon juice turned into one of psychology's most famous lessons, proof that sometimes the greatest danger isn't just being wrong, but being too sure you're right. The black and white photo shows a Filipino family at Coney Island's Dreamland seated on the ground as curious crowds gather around them. Another image captures a young Filipino child tied near a wooden rail on display for paying visitors. These disturbing scenes were part of what were known as human zoos. Dreamland, which operated between 1904 and 1911, wasn't just about rides and lights. It was also home to ethnological expositions, where people were treated as spectacles. One of the most popular was the Lilliputian Village, a fully functional miniature town where hundreds of little people lived and worked under constant public gaze. Families wandered its streets as if strolling through a real-life Gulliver's Travels, unaware or uncaring that the inhabitants were being reduced to curiosities. Another attraction was the Igorote, or Filipino village. After the US claimed the Philippines following the Spanish-American War, Dreamland capitalized on imperial propaganda by importing groups from the Bontoc region of Luzon. They were advertised as primitive tribes, their culture sensationalized, their diet mocked, and their daily lives staged for audiences. At times, young Filipino children were tied to posts as patrons hurled peanuts at them. Dreamland's fascination with the exotic extended further. A Borneo village brought over headhunters in 1910, promoted as wild warriors. The attraction failed after just one season, and one villager, Rhonda Rangat, tragically died during his time there. Dreamland's human zoos reflected the colonial mindset of the early 20th century, marketing exploitation as education and turning human beings into attractions. While Dreamland burned to the ground in 1911, these photos endure as haunting reminders of the era's racism, imperialism, and casual dehumanization. On July 24, 1915, the SS Eastland was docked at Clark and Wacker in Chicago, preparing to ferry Western Electric employees to a company picnic. The vessel was overcrowded with more than 3,000 passengers, and before it could even leave the dock, it capsized in the river. In a matter of minutes, 844 people were dead, entire families among them. It remains one of the deadliest maritime disasters in American history. The tragedy left behind not only grief, but a trail of paranormal claims that still ripple across Chicago. At the site of the sinking, witnesses standing on bridges or looking out from nearby restaurants report seeing faces beneath the water and hands reaching upward, as though still begging to be saved. Police have even been called to investigate reports of people drowning, only to find no one there. With so many bodies to account for, local morgues were overwhelmed, forcing buildings to be converted into temporary holding sites. At the Reed Murdoch warehouse, staff have reported shadow figures gliding down hallways, phantom footsteps in empty rooms, and doors that creak open and slam shut on their own. The 2nd Regiment Armory, which held the bulk of the victims, later became Harpo Studios, home of the Oprah Winfrey Show. Oprah and her staff soon discovered the building carried a heavy history. They heard children laughing in empty corridors and a woman sobbing in bathrooms. Oprah even had her own frightening encounter far from the studio in her Chicago home.
In my house, here in Chicago, sleeping in the guest bedroom, which is right next to my bedroom.
She awoke one night to find a figure moving across her bedroom floor.
I woke up in the middle of the night. I saw a ghost in the room. I'm telling you, it was a ghost in the room.
The following morning, her cousin claimed she had fought off a ghost in the adjoining guest room, eventually pushing it under the door into Oprah's space.
I had the worst night of my life. I was fighting this ghost all night long. And finally, I was able to push him under the door.
Shaken, Oprah later admitted she hadn't believed in ghosts until that night.
And I didn't want to believe it was a ghost in the room because I never believed in ghosts or didn't believe in ghosts. But I saw this figure, clear figure, moving across the floor.
From the murky waters of the Chicago River to the studios of America's most famous talk show host, the echoes of the Eastland disaster still linger, a reminder that some tragedies never truly fade. Coming up in our last segment, in just a few seconds, we take a look at an infamous work of art that many claim is cursed. But before we do, remember to leave some comments, smash like, and share this episode with your friends and family. At first glance, this Juan Luna painting looks serene, a young woman reclining with a rosary in hand. But behind the canvas lies a history of jealousy, murder, and misfortune that's led many to call it cursed. Luna's marriage to Paz Pardo de Tavera was notoriously violent. In 1892, he shot and killed his mother-in-law, fatally wounded Paz, and injured her brother. Though acquitted under a crime of passion defense, the killings forever tied Luna's art to tragedy. Legend claims Paz's spirit attached itself to this portrait, bringing grief to its owners. And the stories are chilling. Early buyer Manuel Garcia went bankrupt. Betty Bantug Benitez later died in a car accident. Tony Nazareno suffered serious illness and the breakdown of his marriage. Even Amy Marcos suffered a miscarriage while the painting hung in her home. Her mother Imelda was later listed as owner, just before the Marcos family's dramatic fall from power in 1986. Paranormal incidents followed too. At a 1987 museum exhibit, the spotlight over the portrait suddenly exploded while all the others stayed lit. Days later, a pipe burst, dripping water directly in front of the painting. Today, Portrait of a Lady sits quietly in the National Museum of the Philippines, but with a history of bankruptcy, tragedy, and even political collapse tied to its name. Is this painting truly cursed, or is it all coincidence? What do you think?
Well, that's the end of the episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you can't get enough of what we do here at Slapped Ham, then consider following these two links right there. Leave us some feedback in the comments section down below. Smash that thumbs up button. And that's it for me. I'll see you all next time.